What's up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the serial killer Israel Keyes, and he is someone that I've wanted to cover for a very, very long time for a plethora of reasons, but I've always seemed to push the video back again and again and again because I can't quite wrap my head around Israel Keyes and his methods. He's very, very different from any other serial killer that I have ever heard about, point blank, period. Even FBI profilers and different FBI agents have stated that his methods are unprecedented. It's one of those situations where it's not like they knew there was a serial killer and it was having to catch them. It was no one even knew there was a serial killer. No cases were linked. There was no idea in the air, and then one mistake he made had him caught, and then the stories unraveled. And it's just very scary because usually serial killers have specific patterns and behaviors and specific victim profiles, and Israel seemed to lack majority of what you typically see. And even though I pushed this video back so many times over the past couple of months, almost every single case I've looked into, his name has popped up. And it really led me to looking more into this and the fact that out of the 11 believed victims, 7 of them have not been identified. And when I looked even deeper than that, the FBI is begging for the public's help. So that's why I decided to go ahead and cover this video. Now, while I was looking into serial killers, when I was researching Israel and their patterns and how individuals seem to have this fascination with serial killers, I realized that Israel was actually one of those people. And he was someone that read books like Mindhunter and read about different FBI profilers and their techniques, and it taught him a lot of the different things that he knew and probably utilized while being a serial killer. And I wanted to know more, so I ended up stumbling across a documentary on Magellan TV, who I need to thank as today's sponsor. Magellan TV is a membership streaming service that was founded by filmmakers, producers, and curators to bring a unique selection of documentary movies, series, and exclusives. They have a ton of featured genres. There's something for absolutely everyone, from science, nature, history, fiction, space, and obviously my personal true favorite, which is true crime. As someone that constantly consumes documentaries and because of that constantly runs out of documentaries to consume, Magellan TV was the perfect option for me. You guys, they add new content weekly, so there is something different all the time, and you can stream from anywhere such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon TV, and all the documentaries stream to you with no interruptions, and you can even watch some of them in 4K at no additional fee, which has been, just saying, absolutely awesome on my brand new TV. And as I said, I ended up stumbling across this documentary, and it was a series called Crime Files on Magellan TV, and there was one particular episode in that series about serial killers, and it featured different serial killers. One that you guys would probably recognize off the top of your head is Peter Tobin, and the entire program went into the behaviors of serial killers, what you expect, kind of what you don't expect, and then it threw in this fictional element that I found so fascinating about how we seem to kind of glamorize and romanticize and, all these things that happen with serial killers and all these books that are made, whether it's, real or if it's fiction. And it really fit into what I was looking into specifically when it came to Israel Keyes and his behavior, and about how we consume information about serial killers, how that can change our perspective of them, and in Israel's case, how it may have taught him to do the things that he did. It was very, very fascinating. I highly recommend it, and if you guys want to watch it for yourself, all you have to do is go to try.magellantv.com/Danielle Hallen, and you will get a 1-month free trial. I can assure you guys you're going to absolutely love it, and after this, you can go and watch the episode on Magellan TV for yourself and see just how scary Israel Keyes is and how different he is. Thank you again to Magellan TV, and now let's get into Israel Keyes. I figured the best way to describe him was the way that authorities saw him for the very first time, which was through one of the victims, the victim that caused him to be caught and unraveled this web of crimes that absolutely nobody was expecting. It was the one time that Israel broke one of his main rules of no local killing. killings. He was a very calculated, very in control serial killer for the 14 years, if not more, that he was killing people. But he had this rule of making sure he completely disconnected himself from the victims, from the locations where the victims were abducted, from the locations that the victims were killed. And at this point in time of the crime that I'm about to speak about, the abduction and murder of Samantha Koenig, he was really losing control. He was getting to a place where he could no longer control his urges, and it was this breaking of this one rule that ultimately led to his demise. On February 1st, 2012, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig from Anchorage, Alaska, was heading to her night shift at a local coffee stand, one of those coffee stands that unfortunately we don't have here on the East Coast, at least where I live. It's a little stand that's usually put up in a parking lot. It was called Common Grounds, and she was working there until about 8 p.m. that night. Now, Samantha was a very reliable worker. She had tons and tons of friends, which I will speak more on in a little bit. She loved her family. She lived with her dad and her boyfriend, I believe, and she had a great relationship with both of them. She had been dating her boyfriend for about 9 months, and he was the one who was supposed to pick her up that night from her shift. So around 8 p.m. or a little bit after, her boyfriend got off of his job and immediately went over to the parking lot where Common Grounds was located in Anchorage to pick up Samantha. But when he arrived there, Samantha was not there, and the entire coffee shop looked like it had been shut down properly. I don't really know what he was thinking along this time. I don't know if he believed that she maybe left with another ride. Maybe he showed up late and she figured she just got tired of waiting. Maybe she got off early. But all I know is that he ended up going back to their house, and she was not there either. I think right off the bat, Samantha's father and boyfriend knew that something probably wasn't quite right, because from what I've seen, Samantha was kind of a homebody. She liked to be with her family. She liked to be with her boyfriend. And if she wasn't with them, they both knew where she was. And it wasn't until a couple hours later when they figured out that they were very right. Something had gone wrong. Samantha sent a text message to her boyfriend, and it said something along the lines of her being tired of things and wanting to get away and go on vacation. And this didn't seem right, because Samantha was 18 years old. She couldn't just, she didn't have a car, and she couldn't just leave her job when her boyfriend was coming to pick her up, a boyfriend she had a good relationship with, to go back home and live with her dad, who she also had a good relationship with. It didn't make sense that she was just going to up and leave and go on vacation. Everything in her life at the time was going okay. There wasn't anything that would have caused her to do this. And on top of that, the way that the text message was worded immediately seemed like someone else had written it. This was not the words of Samantha at all. So both her father and her boyfriend decided to go ahead and report her missing. By the next morning, authorities managed to contact the owner of Common Grounds to say, look, she went missing from your coffee shop, even though it was closed up. We think something might have happened right out here while she was waiting for her ride. Do you have surveillance footage? And they happily passed it over, and it showed something terrifying that honestly no one really expected. Around 8 p.m., the footage shows that Samantha is doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. She was shutting down the coffee shop, and right at 8, right as they were closing, it appeared another customer. The last customer walked up to the window. Samantha seems fine. She seems in a great mood. There doesn't seem to be anything bothering her, and she walks up to the window, takes the order, makes the coffee, and as she goes to hand the coffee to this person, all of a sudden she throws her hands up as if she has a gun pointed at her. After this, she proceeds to back up. She's clearly panicking a little bit, and it appears she's instructed to turn the lights off. And as soon as she does this, the person jumps through the coffee shop window. When this person jumps inside, it's kind of clear that Samantha believes, or seems to believe, this is a robbery, that this intruder is just going to take a few things and leave, but that's not what happened. This intruder did not take anything other than Samantha. This was an abduction. Samantha's phone had obviously gone with her, as well as her debit card and pretty much everything that had been brought with her to work that day. And the eeriest thing about it is that this wasn't taken when Samantha was abducted. This intruder, this abductor, came back after the fact and got into the coffee house and grabbed those different items and left. And shortly after doing this, her bank card was used at an ATM, likely checking the account for money. But they had no leads. They had no idea who would want to do this to Samantha. She was a really calm, chill person. She had her close group of friends, she had her family, her boyfriend, and that was pretty much it. So they decided to start where most investigations start, which is with the family and friends. But pretty quickly, everyone was ruled out, and it seemed like they hit a wall. So they decided to go ahead and see if any of the other local businesses had any surveillance footage that may have shown things from a different angle. Maybe a car was involved, maybe more people were involved, maybe they could see where this person came from, and sure enough, they hit the jackpot. At a nearby business, there was another bit of surveillance footage that clearly showed the coffee stand, and it showed Samantha and this man walking away from the coffee stand and getting into a white pickup truck. After close examination, they were able to see that the truck was likely a 1999 to 2007 white Chevy truck. That's pretty much the closest they could narrow it down to. They decided to do a quick run of how many vehicles are in the Anchorage area that would match this, and they came back with thousands of results, which yes, technically does kind of narrow things down, but that's still a whole lot of work. So they decided to go ahead and bring in the FBI, because at this point, they have no leads. They're not sure who would have done this. This person was trying to access money, so they were wondering if there was going to be a ransom, and all they had was this car and thousands of different matching vehicles on a database online. Local authorities utilized FBI profilers to try to figure out anything they could about who may have attacked Samantha and taken Samantha, while her family and the community rallied together to really spread the news. I know that within such a short period of time, flyers had been put up all over the state of Alaska. They had hosted a few searches, there was a vigil, and hundreds of people showed up, you guys, and the videos bring me to absolute tears because there's people that are just screaming, you know, what more can we do? How can we help you? What else is there? There was just such a massive outpouring of love and support for Samantha's family and close friends. And just as things started to seem to come to a standstill, something changed. 3 weeks later, after Samantha had been taken, another text message came into Samantha's boyfriend's phone from Samantha. Well, again, Samantha. It said, "Connor Park sign under pic of Albert, ain't she purty?" Now, Connor Park was just outside of downtown Anchorage, and her family decided to rush to this location to see what was going on, and they spotted a picture on the sign of a dog, and it said, "Missing dog, Albert." Albert was his name. Underneath of that pic of Albert, they found a plastic bag, and inside of the plastic bag, it appeared there was a couple pieces of paper or just something that seemed a little bit odd. So her family called authorities, and authorities showed up and took this in as evidence. Upon looking into this plastic bag, they found a few very disturbing things. There was a picture of Samantha. The picture itself it appeared someone had edited it. It was made to be very blurry, so it was kind of difficult to see any details. There was a newspaper that was very clear that said February 13th, indicating that she was okay. And, you know, from the first when she was abducted through the 13th, she appeared to be alive in the picture. They gave this picture to Samantha's dad to positively ID her because it was so fuzzy. And he said, you know, yeah, this definitely looks like her, but the one strange thing is that she has a braid in her hair, and she never ever wears a braid, but it definitely does look like her. And apart from this picture, there was a ransom note. This note basically said, I want $30,000 deposited into Samantha's bank account immediately, and I don't know if it promised that this person would give her back or what exactly would happen, but authorities kind of saw this as a great idea because they could put in money into the bank account, and the only way this person would be able to access it would be if they went to an ATM. They obviously aren't going to risk going into a bank or anything, but ATMs, first of all, have surveillance footage, and the FBI would be able to work with the bank that Samantha was with to get alerts the second the bank account was accessed. So that's exactly what they did. I think they put in $5,000 at first just to see what would happen, and sure enough, shortly after this, her bank account was accessed. It was accessed 3 times total over the course of a few days, and $500 was drawn out each and every time. That wasn't anything significant. That was just the most that was allowed to be withdrawn every single day. And every single time, authorities were just minutes behind this person. And so they decided, okay, whatever, we'll look into the surveillance footage since we apparently cannot get there fast enough. But when they did this, it gave them no more answers either. This person was wearing a mask and gloves and was fully clothed head to toe. A hood was up. You could not tell a single thing. You couldn't find a car in the background. You couldn't see which direction this person was going. So it led them nowhere. And then again, there was silence until March 7th. But instead of her card being used in Anchorage, her card was used over 4,000 miles away in Willcox, Arizona. And authorities were baffled. They immediately started sending out information everywhere they could along these different areas in Arizona, thinking where this person might go next. And they also gathered the surveillance footage from the ATM that this person had used in Willcox, Arizona. And the same thing, they were able to see this person was wearing a mask and a hood and gloves, and they couldn't tell anything except the abductor this time slipped up. And in the very background of the footage, they were able to see a white Ford Focus. So while they didn't have a full description of the person that was the abductor, they were fairly certain that that car was absolutely involved. And at this point, keep in mind, they believe that Samantha's still alive. If this person sent a picture with a date on it and then also asked for a ransom, it's very possible she's out there alive somewhere. Could she possibly be with him? So all around Arizona, they sent out information to the police. But shortly after this, there was another ATM hit in New Mexico. And then shortly after that, another one in Texas. And then there was a little bit of a pause and then a few more in Texas. And while each time the surveillance footage gave them no more information, they were able to see that this person was clearly following a very specific highway, going a very specific direction. So they decided to think ahead and kind of tell authorities further along the line, look, this guy may be coming your way, look for a Ford Focus. And on March 13th, that Ford Focus was found. There was a state trooper that happened to see this white Ford Focus driving along that looked really, really familiar to the car from the photo and the surveillance, and he decided to scope it out. This car was parked at a local motel in Texas. The trooper waited for the driver to come and get in the car, and when he did, it was this white male, and he got in the car and drove off, and the trooper only had to wait for him to make any sort of traffic infraction at all in order to pull him over. As soon as he did, the car was pulled over. When the trooper approached the window, it was this very average looking white male. When he got this man's ID, it was an Alaskan ID, so it matched up with what Alaskan authorities were saying, and it was a 34-year-old man named Israel Keys. Now, back in Anchorage, Alaska, they're sitting here scratching their heads because they're like, who is this man? How was he not on our radar? This seems so absolutely random. Why would he up and choose this young woman to attack? So they looked into his criminal record, and that didn't make anything any more clear either, because he only had one DUI. He had been in the army, like clean record other than that. But sure enough, when the trooper searched his car, the trooper found Samantha Koenig's cell phone, her debit card, a handful of other things, as well as a gun, a .22 caliber gun. So they arrested Israel Keys and brought him into jail. Now back in Anchorage, they have all this information, and they're like, maybe he took this car, maybe this is a thief that just took something from this area and then ran with it, not knowing it had anything to do with the disappearance. They had to have more information. So they decided to go and check at his house. And when they arrived, the first thing they saw when they pulled up was a white Chevy truck matching the truck seen in the surveillance footage by Common Grounds coffee stand. At this point, this was enough for them to extradite Israel Keys back to Anchorage, but that didn't happen for about 2 weeks. There's this huge potential that Samantha's out there alive somewhere and that Israel can give them information. He apparently was not speaking to anyone down in Texas, but when he got back to Anchorage, it seems like everything he didn't say just began to flow. Israel Keys openly admitted to killing Samantha Koenig, but he said that he would not give them the details until he had, get this, a Starbucks Americano, a Snickers, and a cigar, a very special type of cigar. And at this point, they just wanted the information from him, so they got him all of these things he asked for, and he just started spewing out this horrific story. And the investigators that were speaking to him at the time said that he was telling this story as if he was telling you what he had for lunch. And when you hear what he says and what he did, the fact that any person was able to just so casually tell this story makes me sick to my stomach. So Israel said that night he stumbled across this coffee stand and decided that he wanted to take whoever was in it. He said that he chose this coffee stand simply because it was open. There was nothing else open around in the area, and this just happened to be there, so he was like, all right, cool, we'll do this. He said that he walked up, ordered a coffee, and then pulled a .22 caliber gun, likely the one that he had in his car, and pointed it at Samantha, telling her to turn the lights off. He then jumped in, like we saw in the surveillance footage. He told her that if she listened to him, that he would let her go. So that's why she was so compliant, is because he said, look, if you fight me, I'm gonna kill you, but if you do every single thing I say, if I get money, if I get this, if I get that, you will go back home to your family safe. He said he then took her to his truck that was parked nearby and back to his house. Now, Israel lived with his girlfriend and his daughter, who I think at the time was 10 years old. And he took Samantha back to his home, where they were at when he brought Samantha there. He used a shed that was outside of the home that apparently his daughter and girlfriend knew not to go into. It was like his personal private shed, his man cave, whatever. And he put Samantha in there. He tied her up, and then he decided to turn music on very loud so that nobody would hear her screaming or any noise that was coming from the shed, because his family is in the house beside him. He proceeds to sexually assault Samantha, and then he, after this, heads back to the coffee shop, gets all of her items, probably coerced her PIN number out of her, because she's still under the assumption that if I give him information and if I, am cooperative with him, I will be let go. He goes and checks her bank account, and then he comes back and he does not let her go. He strangled and stabbed Samantha and then put her into, I believe, a box inside of this shed. But it just keeps getting worse. It just keeps getting worse from here. Immediately after killing this young woman and stuffing her body into a box, he goes inside of his home, packs up his bags, and flies to Louisiana with his family, where he hops on a cruise ship and enjoys the Caribbean for about 2 to 2.5 weeks. Immediately after abducting, lying to, strangling, sexually assaulting, stabbing, and killing this young woman, authorities at this point are listening to the way that he is telling this story. They're listening to the things that he did, the fact that there seemed to be no remorse. He did this as if it was routine, and they started to wonder if this was not the first time he had killed someone. But he had never been on their radar before, and this was just so random off the wall that they weren't quite sure what to think. Israel told authorities that when he arrived back from his vacation, he realized that Samantha's body had frozen while he was gone because of the low temperatures in Alaska. And he knew that it would be very difficult to dispose of a frozen body, so he somehow thawed her body out, but he took it a step further. He took makeup, which all I can think about is, did he take his girlfriend's makeup? He took makeup and applied it on Samantha to make her look more alive, in his own words. And he braided her hair, which is also why her dad, didn't recognize her really that much at first, because her hair was braided and she never did that. Well, that's because her killer did it. And he posed her, making her look alive, and purposely made that photo fuzzy that was given to authorities on that sign, to make it seem like she was alive so that he could get that mass amount of money. So that picture, she had actually been dead the entire time. She had been thawed out and makeup had been applied to her so that it would seem she was alive. After that, he sent the text message to Samantha's boyfriend. He said that he decided to dismember Samantha, and then he took 3 separate trips to Matanuska Lake, which was about 30 miles away. And this lake was a very deep lake. He said he specifically wanted to look for a deep one, and he realized that this lake was known for ice fishing. So there were lots of people on the lake, and he had to be a little bit sneaky. So he drilled a hole, and in between casting his line for fishing, he would slip in pieces of Samantha's body. He caught fish. He told authorities that he caught fish while he was throwing parts of Samantha down to the bottom of this icy lake, and he took those same fish and he took them home to his family, cooked them, and fed them to his family. Just like he likely used his girlfriend's makeup on a girl that had been dead for 2 weeks and then probably put it back. It just, I told you guys, like, I can't wrap my mind around how someone can do that and not think twice about it, not flinch, bat an eye. He laughed when he told him, he's like, oh, I cooked the fish and took him home to my family. It's disturbing. Samantha's family and friends were devastated at the horrific way that she had been murdered simply because she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was just trying to work her shift. And this crazy man chose her simply because of that. And his story just continued to get darker because everyone, again, that they had spoken to were like, there's no way Israel is capable of this. There's no way that he did this. But he was also looking authorities in the eye without flinching or without any sign of remorse, telling them exactly what he did in the most gory detail that he possibly can. And while authorities are thinking in the back of their mind, you know, this man could be a serial killer, Israel starts to basically admit that himself.
Right now, there is no one who knows me or who has ever known me who knows anything about me, really. They know they're going to tell you something that does not line up with anything I tell you because I'm two different people, basically. And the only person who knows about what I'm telling you, the kind of things I'm telling you, is me.
How long have you been two different people?
Long time. 14 years.
Israel said that he was actually two different people, and he had been two different people for a very, very long time. And when authorities asked him how long he had been two different people, Israel said for 14 years. So to authorities, this translated to he had been killing people like this for 14 years, and they had a lot of victims that they had to find. Israel was eager to speak about the fact that he had murdered before, and he was not shy at all about giving authorities details about it. He would throw in bits of information here and there about very obvious different murders. It was never things like, you know, the person's name or where necessarily exactly it happened. He would sometimes give a state, but mainly it was just him describing exactly what he did to the person, again, in gory detail. And the more authorities pushed him, the more that he would run them around in circles. It was very clear that Israel was a very smart and calculated person, and he knew exactly what he was doing while in these interviews with authorities. He had probably thought this out multiple different times over the past 14 years and what he wanted to say and what he didn't want to say, and most of all, Israel wanted control. He wanted control while he was in this room, which is why he asked for the Americano, why he asked for the cigar, why he asked for all these very specific things. It was clear he was not handing this information over easily. Even though he wanted to talk about it, he made sure he didn't talk about it in a way that he would lose any control of the situation. Authorities decided to go ahead and look into all of his bank records and his travel history, and they wanted to see, you know, where has he been? What has he done? Is this something he's just done locally? Clearly he drove halfway across the country. You know, is that something he's been doing? And that became the reality, that Israel Keyes had been absolutely everywhere. And when they started looking into who he was and how he grew up, the scary story just continued. Israel Keyes had been born in Cove, Utah on January 7th, 1978 to Heidi and Jeffrey Keyes. He was the second oldest son of 10 children total, and they lived a rather unusual life. His parents did not believe in any sort of modern medicine. They did not believe in government interference of any kind. They did not believe in a lot of different religions, which I'll get into deeper into this video. They also did not believe in public schooling. So Israel and all of his siblings never knew typical socialization skills or majority of the things that most people in the world were experiencing. They grew up knowing absolutely nothing. They lived in the middle of nowhere most of the time, which again I'll describe deeper in a little bit. They were raised in the middle of the woods with no electricity, no heat, no outside contact with the world other than the churches they would go to, which had bizarre ideals, and it was an interesting childhood. At the age of 5, his family moved from Cove, Utah to Colville, Washington. And this is where he ended up spending majority of his childhood. I believe he actually lived here till he went to the Army, which I believe was in 1998. So he spent most of his childhood here, and they lived up on a mountain, again, in the middle of nowhere, and they picked this spot particularly because the pathway to get up this mountain to and from their house was impassable majority of the year because of the snow. And they wanted it this way. They didn't want people to come and bother them. They didn't want to have to go down and see people. They really wanted to just live in their own little bubble. When they were in Utah, they were in the Church of Latter-day Saints, but when they came to Washington, they joined a church called the Ark. And for a lot of you that have heard of the Ark before, you're probably like, oh, this all makes sense now. Now, the Ark, in a nutshell, from my research and seeing statements from those that knew Israel that were also a part of the church, it's Christian identity theology, which essentially is where it's Christianity. You believe that any race other than white is subhuman. But it goes way past that, even to anyone other than any white person in the church, even other white people, anyone who just disagrees with what this church believes, they are subhuman. So it's basically creating, as it was described by those that went to the church, like an us and them situation where everyone in the church, they're superior to everybody. Their ideas are the only that should be believed, and anyone who thinks other than that is crazy, subhuman, not worthy of time and attention. And it was scary knowing that he was raised in that sort of environment and what he went on to do. And it is believed that this likely contributed to how he could so easily dehumanize pretty much anyone. He saw himself as being the superior. And that even came through when he was being interviewed by the FBI, because when he was in that room, he genuinely believed everybody revolved around him, that he could demand anything, that he was smarter than everyone there, that there was no way that anyone would find out any information about what he had done. It even comes down to how he thought that everyone viewed him. He said that everyone that ever knew him in life never actually knew him. They were seeing what he wanted them to see, but that the only person that really knew who he was himself. He was just raised in a very scary environment. This church, just an FYI, is actually seen as a cult, and it's even on a list of racist and terrorist organizations. So it's just a really scary situation, and this is what was molding his life growing up. And he started to display very odd behaviors at a very young age. And now there's a lot of debate on whether the way he was raised and this church and things like that, if they contributed to it or if he would have been the way he is regardless. I know that's just like an overall argument between people who are curious about serial killers, but he started to show signs at a very young age. He would go out hunting a lot. Again, they lived in the middle of nowhere. That was something that they did frequently, hunting, fishing, but he seemed to do it for very different reasons. It wasn't to gather food or anything like that. He seemed to get this thrill out of killing and torturing animals, which we see a lot with serial killers. There was a particular time where one of his friends or someone that just grew up around him, I think this person was in the church, said that he shot a deer and he knew he didn't kill this deer fully. And instead of doing what hunters do, which is go and finish what they started and then gut the deer, he decided to gut the deer alive. And it was just instances like this over and over again. He would reminisce during FBI interviews of people that he would bring over to his home to go hunting with him, or if he'd be playing, he would torture animals. And he said that he realized at that point that maybe he was a little bit different because he thought these things were hilarious. He genuinely thought they were great. He was still laughing about them when he would tell the FBI about them. But he said that he would look and like his friends would be getting physically sick, like throwing up from being so disturbed and disgusted. And he could never understand why they reacted like that, because he thought that it was great. He also started to do things like stalk his neighbors. He would watch them, wait till they left, and he would break into their homes. Usually he would only steal their guns to, again, torture more animals. A lot of people that knew him said he gave them a very uneasy vibe. Like, he just seemed like something was off. Something wasn't quite right. His social skills were different. And Again, very typical of serial killers. By the late 90s, his family moved to Oregon, and I feel like around this time is when he split ways from his family. He told his family that he no longer believed the same faith that they did, and instead he was looking into Satanism. When his dad ended up disowning him because of this, and I know that he did have some contact with the rest of his family, but I think at this point he was pretty much on his own. In 1998, shortly after this, he decided to join the United States Army. According to what Israel told the FBI agents, it was because he was so excited to be in the army to have to use survival skills. He loved the idea of like walking a fine line between life and death and proving again that he was superior and he could stay alive. And he did great in the army. He excelled very, very fast. He was stationed for, I think, 6 months in Egypt, and I think he like harassed people while he was over in Egypt, mainly sex workers, and he also went on to work in Fort Hood, which, oh boy, oh boy. And then he went on to Fort Lewis in Washington, and that was the last place that he was stationed. And while he was there, he ended up meeting a young woman in Nia Bay. She was part of the Maka Reservation, which I found very interesting, and it kind of comes into play later. He was, raised with these ideals that any other race, indigenous people, all of that, they're all subhuman, but he did end up, dating this woman and having a little girl. 2001, while she was still pregnant, Israel was honorably discharged. He was done with the army, and he decided to move into his girlfriend's home in Nia Bay, where he lived for 6 years. But while it seems like he's still living this average life, this is actually when things really started to go downhill, and some people question if it happened even prior to the army. He had decided, according to his own words, while he was in the army, that he was going to fully start acting out on his urges to and fantasies of killing strangers. He said that he had known since the time he was 14, when he read the book Mindhunter, which makes me sick to my stomach because it's one of my favorites, and I can't believe that contributed to this man and what he decided to do. But he said that he, after reading Mindhunter, realized he wasn't alone. He was reading about other serial killers and was like, oh great, I'm one of those, I fit into that. So shortly after moving in with his girlfriend, he got a job working on the Olympic Peninsula in the Parks and Recreation Department, which pretty much again just gave him access to learning all this information about rivers and lakes, deep lakes, and different areas that were way off grid, and this probably gave him a ton of knowledge and things that he used when he really started to kill people. And then he eventually ended up in Anchorage. He split up with his girlfriend, his daughter's mother, and ended up with another woman, and he moved with her and his daughter to Anchorage. But authorities, are like, okay, so he has this crazy backstory, and he's saying that he killed Samantha, and he's saying that he's killed other people before, but they really wanted proof at this point. Because unfortunately, just a confession doesn't really get you anywhere, surprisingly. I feel like most people believe you go in, you give a confession, and it's like, okay, they said they did it, so let's move on. That's not how the justice system works. So usually needs to be something else backing that, because people can say whatever they want. We see it all the time. We're wondering if maybe he was just getting off on, telling authorities these fake stories and sending them off on a goose chase. He seemed to love the attention, so it wouldn't be that surprising. But he finally decided that he was going to give them 2 victims' names, but he again had conditions. He did not want any of the information or his name going and being posted by any media, and I think it's ironic and funny in my opinion, because he said, I don't want this to turn into some kind of true crime BS, and anyways, we'll move past that. I thought that was really ironic. He did not want his name in the media because he was worried about his daughter seeing it and his mother. FBI profilers and other people have looked into it and been like, he used that as a scapegoat. He probably didn't really care at all. And on top of that, he also wanted an immediate execution date. Now, he had no idea about the justice system for the most part. He believed that he could just go in and demand this execution date after he'd confessed without giving any physical evidence, and that it would just be done, that he would be killed and everything would just move on. But that's not how things work. First of all, the death penalty, usually execution dates are way far out in advance. Trials don't happen for, years sometimes. Granted, if the person pleads guilty, things can move a little bit faster, but still, it's not something that anyone takes lightly. Ending someone's life is irreversible. And whether they confess or not, there's a certain process that has to be followed so that something bad doesn't happen. And so they couldn't promise Israel this. They said, we'll keep your name out of the media, but as best as we can at least, but we can't give you an execution date. And he fought this for a while. It was not what he wanted. He was not understanding that it wasn't as easy as he thought it was. But authorities tried a different tactic that they believed would work in their favor. They said, okay, well, if you want an execution date, what we can do is you can give us as many names, locations of bodies, murder weapons that you can give us that you've been involved in, things that, you know, only you would know, and then that would make it more likely that you will get sentenced to death, because it seemed like he was going to go in and plead guilty, which means, you know, he's passing up his trial, and the judge would then have full rights to decide what exactly would happen to him. And they basically said the more people that you have a trail behind you that you've admitted to, the more likely you'll get what you want. But still, he just wasn't so sure about this. They decided to work on him a bit, and after a few more Americanos and a few more cigars, he finally gave them the two names. This brings us to 48-year-old Bill and 55-year-old Lorraine Currier from Essex, Vermont. So yes, the other side of the country. And I was kind of to myself thinking, they're gonna be blown away. My viewers are gonna be blown away when I speak about Israel Keyes, because when I was speaking on the Catherine Kaloge video and I brought up the fact that they believe Ted Bundy may have been involved, everyone was like, oh no, he couldn't have been involved because he was on, like, he's on the West Coast and, you know, he couldn't have gone that far. And you guys, if you knew the way that this man, that Israel Keyes, moved around this country undetected, like from one side to the other in no time, like the fact that he was in Anchorage, Alaska, and then all of a sudden he's in Texas, you can't put anything past this man. You cannot. So basically, Israel claimed that it was June of 2011. He flew from Anchorage to Chicago, so he didn't even fly to Vermont. He flew halfway, and then he rented a car and drove the rest of the way. He made this trip with the sole intentions of killing someone. No other reason. And this is when the FBI and police found out about Israel Keyes' kill kits, or kill caches. They've got a few names. It's exactly what it sounds like. Again, Israel was unlike any other serial killer, and this is one of the main reasons. While most serial killers have a specific kind of target, kids, or, you know, brunettes, or redheads, or college kids, or, you know, the list goes on and on. Israel did not care who the person was. They could be short, tall, a kid, you know, an adult, a grandparent, a brother, like a couple. It could have been a mom and a son. Like, it didn't matter who it was at all. The thing that he cared about was location and planning. So Israel traveled all over the country. There was evidence that he had been in Vermont and Texas, New Mexico, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Wyoming. He had driven through New York. He had driven through New Jersey. He had been in Egypt. He had been all over South America. Through the army and through his own bizarre travels, he had been everywhere. And while he was on these little vacations of his, he would scope out spots that he was like, you know what? It would be cool to put a kill kit here, to hide a kill kit here, and then come back to it later and use it to kill someone in this area. He would get the orange Home Depot buckets, the ones that are waterproof, and he would fill them with guns, a few different magazines. He would fill them with a few different stocks, tons and tons of ammunition, duct tape, rope, knives, Drano, basically everything he would need from the abduction to the murder to disposal of the body, all contained in one simple bucket that he could take and use. And then I don't even think anyone knows what he did with them afterwards, if he put them back, if he found a new location for them. But basically, He admitted to having 11 or 12 of these, and one of those was located in Vermont, and he had buried it in 2009 while on another road trip on the East Coast that's linked to a whole bunch of different crimes I'll get into later. He was displaying things that no other serial killer had. This patience. You know, most serial killers, they're waiting for that person. They're waiting for that one person to walk by, or, you know, that they stalk, that they attack, and it's a spur of the moment thing. But this was not what Israel did. He didn't care who the person was. He waited until all of a sudden he's like, hey, I think I want to kill now. And he went to his bucket and he killed whoever he came across that fit the bill. And unfortunately, Bill and Lorraine were two of those people. So he said that he arrived in Essex, Vermont, and he got a motel room, and he drove around for a little bit to scope out a place to kill his victim, or victims, which it ended up being. And this is something that he said he would do. Sometimes he would abduct them and kill them, you know, in the same place and then dispose of them. Sometimes he would take them somewhere else and torture them for a while and then dispose of them. And sometimes he'd take them after he killed them across state lines for thousands of miles and, you know, dump their bodies. But he said this time he wanted to take the victim or victims to a location, and it ended up being this abandoned farmhouse that he found while out driving around. So then after he found this location, he decided to take his car back to the motel, and on foot, he just was like, I'm gonna go walk to the first neighborhood that I find. And all he wanted was a garage, so there was easy access into the home. He did not want there, or he would at least prefer there to not be any pets or children, because in his own words, they complicated things. And also he apparently said that after his daughter was born, he decided he wouldn't hurt children. Again, we'll speak more on that in a little bit. And he found the Currier's house. He said that he could tell from their backyard and the way it was laid out that there were no kids there. There weren't any toys. There were also no dog toys. It was just an older couple. So he decided they were going to be the victims that night. He waited a couple of hours for everyone to go to sleep in the neighborhood, and then he decided to get in to the garage through a window, a fan in a window. And then once he was in the garage, he shattered some glass, a glass door that was there, and got in and said within seconds he was restraining both Bill and Lorraine. He told them that they were going to get into their own car, and he was driving them to a location. And one thing that is odd that, like, really, in my opinion, shows that he was two different people was that he also, before taking them to their car, told them to put slippers on so they wouldn't cut their feet and get hurt while walking across the glass that he just broke, breaking into their home on the way for him to kill them. But he didn't want them to cut their feet. I don't know if maybe that was a display of him having, you know, the two different people, or if maybe that was just an example of how perfectly he cleaned up after his crime scenes and left absolutely no evidence behind that there was a struggle or anyone had been harmed. But he loaded them up in the car and he took them to the abandoned house. He took Bill downstairs where he fully restrained him, and he took Lorraine upstairs and he began to sexually assault her. Now, she had almost escaped one time while he was restraining Bill, but unfortunately, Israel managed to gain control again, and while he was sexually assaulting Lorraine, Bill started to break free downstairs, had to go downstairs, and apparently Bill got out, or almost got out quite a few times, and this final time, Israel was kind of tired of it, so he just shot and killed Bill. He went back upstairs and ended up strangling Lorraine, and he put both of their bodies, I believe, in trash bags and put them downstairs in the basement of the abandoned home. And immediately he left and put thousands of miles between him and this couple that he had just killed. He ditched their car and left absolutely no evidence behind. When authorities heard about the fact, and it was reported that Bill and Lorraine were missing, they said it was bizarre. It was like they literally just vanished, because if it was a break-in, you would expect a struggle. It was clearly a break-in because glass was broken, but there was no struggle within the home. It didn't appear anything was taken, so robbery wasn't the motive. It appeared as if they left willingly, so that was just very strange to authorities. When they found the car, there was no DNA evidence or anything left behind in it, so it was very strange. The only thing that I think they gathered was a sketch that was done. Someone believed they saw this man driving Bill and Lorraine's car, and looking back, the sketch looks an awful lot like Israel Keyes, but other than that, there was nothing linking him to this crime at all. Authorities immediately notified Vermont police that were investigating, and they were shocked. Bill and Lorraine were the most unsuspecting victims. They kept to themselves. It didn't make any sense. Their entire family was just destroyed at the fact that they had just vanished. And to hear that, this sweet couple had so viciously been taken from this world was devastating and gut-wrenching. They went straight to the house that Israel said that he killed them in, and they were expecting to find the remains in the basement, but they showed up and found that the house had been demolished. And upon researching it, it was actually demolished very shortly after Bill and Lorraine had been killed. Everything from the house after being demolished was taken to a local landfill, and the FBI and local authorities searched for 12 weeks, as much as they could, desperately trying to locate the bodies of Bill and Lorraine or any evidence whatsoever. And they had absolutely no luck. And when Israel was told that this house had been demolished, he laughed. He laughed and was like, oh, I had no idea. But honestly, I think he did know. I think this is one of his control plays that he did. Right around the time that he gave up this information, authorities were getting sick of his crap. They were, originally giving him coffee and cigars and playing buddy-buddy with him, but he was not giving them anything new, and they were getting irritated. And I think he started to realize he was losing control over the situation. And I think he wanted to give them someone, but he didn't want them to have any evidence to prove it still, so they would have to keep running in circles and keep playing this game with him. And so I personally think he knew, absolutely knew, that this house had been demolished and they'd find nothing, and that's exactly why he gave them up. I think it also gave him a way to speak about some of his victims and, this intricate, gory story that he seemed to love to tell. I think this was a way of doing that and him being able to, applaud himself for his own work without, again, actually directly being physically linked to it. At this point, authorities are at a complete loss because they're hearing the kind of monster that Israel is. He's openly telling them the horrific things that he has done, but they still have nothing physically to back it. They tried to convince him to give up his kill kit that he used when he murdered Bill and Lorraine, but he would not give them the one from Vermont. But he did give them an area in Alaska that he was stashing Drano, I believe. And then I've also seen that a kill kit was found in Wyoming. I don't know if the one in Wyoming is the one that I have pictures of. It was found near the Green River, and what was contained in it was exactly what he said were in all of these kill kits. And I'm not sure if this one was given to them by Israel or if someone stumbled upon it. I feel like it was given to them. But what's even crazier is when they found, the Drano. No DNA evidence on it connecting it at all to Israel Keys, even though he put it there. When they found this kill kit, initially they were finding absolutely nothing at all on it. They did in fact find a silencer in Vermont that Israel led them to.
Hardest investigation, the longest investigation I've ever been involved with in 28 years.
About a half-mile down a path at the Woodside Natural Area is where Detective George Murdy says Israel Keys hid what was used to murder Bill and Lorraine Currier.
Yes, this general area, and a lot of what guided us was the sharp bend in the Winooski River right here.
The serial killer told authorities he buried a cache of items, including a handgun, in a box, calling it a murder kit. Federal investigators say Keys initially stashed it in April 2009. He retrieved it over 2 years later before killing the Curriers. He then hid most of the items in Parrishville, New York, where they remained until he started confessing to his crimes.
They recovered Bill and Lorraine Currier's gun and pieces of the what turned out to be the murder weapon.
Detective Murdy said he wasn't surprised Keys chose a location like this because a wooded, isolated area would have been in Keys' comfort zone.
He was very comfortable out in the woods and in wilderness areas.
They found something from the kill kit that had a perfect thumbprint. There's a thumbprint on a bullet, and it perfectly matched Israel Keys. And when they told him this information, out of everything, this is what he was upset about. This is when he, for the first time, was like upset. And it was because he felt like he hadn't done his job properly. He said he was disappointed in himself for leaving evidence behind because that meant he wasn't doing a good job. So while it seemed they maybe were getting closer and they maybe were starting to get to him and he was maybe going to give up more because he realized maybe he hadn't done as great as he thought he had, all of a sudden Vermont police released his name and he lost it. He was pissed. He said that that was, the one thing that he had been holding on to, that they had promised him, that they absolutely could give him. All this trust was totally gone. He was like, everything I've said now is going to be out. I'm sure you're going to tell everyone everything. I don't want those stories to be out like that. I was going to tell you more and now I'm not going to. It was a really scary situation for the FBI agents working with him because they're like, great, like we had gotten so far. We've played these games with him. We've, exhausted ourselves for months now, and now it's completely ruined. But Israel still was slowly giving information. They could just tell they were beginning to lose him. He stopped accepting cigars. He stopped asking for Snickers. I mean, they would bring him coffee and he'd be like, no, I'm trying to stop drinking that. Just things like that. He was trying to take back control because he felt like he lost it. And to Israel, that was the worst thing to ever happen to him, was to lose control. But they kept pushing him and they kept pushing him, and he slowly started to give them a little bit more information. He told them that his first attempted murder was in 1997 or 1998 before he joined the army. He was again around like 18 years old at the time. He said that he was working in Oregon on the Deschutes River, and this particular river, especially the location he was at, was known for tubing. A lot of teenagers would go down there in their inner tubes with their beer and with their soda and snacks. They would just float down the river and have a great time. And at one point, he noticed that one of the groups had a young woman who was floating pretty far in the back of the group, away from everybody else. So he watched her from the beach for a while, and then when she got far enough away, he waded out into the water and grabbed her. He took her to the campground bathroom where he tied her up and sexually assaulted her, and he had full intentions of killing her. He knew everything he was going to do, from how he was going to kill her. He knew exactly where he was going to put her to kill this young woman. And she actually might have been a young girl, because he said she was either anywhere from 14 or 12, 14 to 18. But he said that she wouldn't stop talking. And it messed with his mind. She kept asking him questions about himself. She kept saying personal things about herself, and it was humanizing her. And it was getting through this dehumanization that he was trying to cast on her so that he could kill her. And she kept saying things like, if you let me go, I promise I won't tell anyone. And he ultimately let her go. And he said that was the last time he ever let anyone go, because immediately after she left, he realized he had a weakness, a weak spot, and that made him sick. That means he had lost control, and he vowed to never let anyone go ever again. Now, from what I've seen, this young woman has never come forward. She's never come out and said, I was this first victim. So I don't know. Part of me is like, did she actually get away? Or, maybe she's just so upset and disturbed from what happened to her, what he did to her. So I can't really say I don't blame her for coming forward either, because I can't imagine having, to live with that kind of trauma and then knowing that that same person that did that to you went on to be a huge serial killer and you were going to be his first victim. But after this, what he claimed was his first attempted kill, he said he then went into the army, which we already spoke about. And then he said after he decided in the army he was going to act on his, fantasies, he came back and killed someone in Nia Bay. He said this is where his first kill was, at least in Nia Bay or the surrounding areas, because he said it's very boring there. A few months after this, he said that he killed his second and third victim in Washington, but he gave no real specific location. He just said that it was a female and a male. He killed the female first. He did not state how, at least I haven't seen how. I'm assuming based on his track record, it was probably strangulation. He then killed the male with a shovel. It's believed that this happened at the same time and that they were a couple, and he said that he buried them, so it seems he's kind of straying away from the water aspect of things. And then he said that in 2005 and 2006, he killed 2 more people. These likely were just individuals. Again, I'm unsure where exactly. There's 4 victims in Washington. So we have Nia Bay and then the couple. So I think one of those may have been one of the ones in Washington. And he kept bringing up to authorities Crescent Lake in Washington, which is the deepest lake in the United States. I haven't double checked this, but from documentaries that I've watched and what he said it was somewhere between 500 and 700 feet deep, and that no one's ever been to the bottom of it. And it is believed that he tossed one of his victims to the bottom of this lake. I know he's mentioned an old anchor to possibly weigh them down. He did have a boat at the time, but unfortunately, there is no way of knowing if he put anyone in the bottom of this lake because of its depth. He then told authorities that after this, he killed someone in New York. I don't believe he gave a time frame for this, but they are pretty sure they narrowed it down to someone. And because of these different bits of information that he gave, they were trying to match it up with his travel information, all of his travel history, and see if they could also, back check that with missing persons in the area. But keep in mind that I also said that he stated once his daughter was born, he wasn't going to harm young children. Now, this was taken a few different ways from authorities. He could have said that in a way of, oh, well, I had been harming children, but now I decided not to. Because according to his timeline, he started killing around the same time his daughter was born. So take that for what you will. But it also made things difficult because there's a lot of great databases for missing children, but there are not a lot of great databases for missing adults. And authorities were having a really hard time connecting information and making sure they got everybody and everything was in the right place. And a lot of the times as well, these different databases for adults just don't contain the same kind of information that you would find when looking up a missing child. There's nowhere near as much detail. A lot of the times, honestly, when I'm looking up in these databases, there's a lot of false information as well. So it was proving to be very, very difficult. But they were able to see that again in 2009 when they believed he went and buried his kill kit in Vermont that he used to kill Bill in Lorraine in 2011, that he likely killed, this is likely when he killed someone in New York. He made a road trip along the East Coast in 2009, and around this time they found that a woman named Deborah Feldman went missing from New Jersey. Now she had no one. She was kind of a drifter. And her missing date was actually kind of up in the air because of this. But authorities narrowed it down to believing that she went missing on April 9th of 2009, around the time frame when Israel was in this area. And they knew this because Israel admitted to robbing a bank, which apparently he also did, that they found out in this moment, in Tupper Lake, New York, around this time, just days later. I think it was like the 12th or the 13th of April, so just days after he may have taken Deborah Feldman. The FBI believes that Deborah was picked up in New Jersey and potentially killed in New Jersey and taken across state lines, which Israel was known for doing, and disposed of in New York. And then they believe that he went and robbed this bank and then stashed a future kill kit, because it seemed to be a pattern based on what he was saying, that he would kind of go big all at one time. It'd be like one big explosion. He would kill someone, stash a kill kit, or rob a bank. Or he also was involved in arson sometimes. Again, the list just like keeps on going. It's so crazy to authorities finding out that he also was robbing banks, because it's like, how does someone do all these things, commit all these huge crimes and just not be caught for it? And he was like, yeah, I was the one who robbed the bank in Tupper Lake, New York. And they looked back, they collected all the information they could about this robbery, and it matched perfectly what Israel was telling them. He said that he showed up with a note and a gun. He was going to pass the note to the teller for the money, so he didn't have to use the gun. But he said when he walked in, he pulled the note out, but then noticed that tons of people were in there, so he panicked and pulled out the gun. And the pictures taken from surveillance from this bank robbery show a man in a mask, just like all the ATM footage, holding a note in one hand and a gun in the other. And they're just like, how on earth did you get away with all of this? I don't even have words for it. But this kind of outed one of the big things that he did that could potentially find other victims, is that he seemed to kind of hit a lot of places all at one time, and a string of locations, travel, rob a bank, kill someone, make a kill kit. It all was connected. So back to Deborah. They not only believe that she was a victim because they managed to find her on a missing persons database, being in that sort of general location around the time that Israel was there, but her name was also found on Israel's computer. Now, this was huge for authorities because Israel was smart, and he didn't document anything on purpose. Like, all of his kill kits, they were not written down anywhere. They were not stored on any hard drives anywhere. They were all memory and memory alone. That's it, which is absolutely insane because he just like randomly drives by a location, puts a kill kit there, and then somehow remembers exactly where that random location he's never been to other than that one time. He somehow remembers that. But he had her name on the computer. And apparently, according to interviews that I've heard, there are a lot of names on his computer. And I don't know what else there is about that. Obviously, that's not linked to any more cases, at least that they know of. But they thought this was a big deal. So they decided to kind of sit down and confront him about this in a very different way. They had a lineup of people that they said could have been victims, and Deborah's picture was in this lineup. And as soon as they got to him, for the first time ever, Israel cracked because he didn't give them information. They came to him a step ahead, and he freaked out. He started to shake. He said, "Oh, no, I don't know her. I know nothing about this woman." And they were like, "Her name was on your computer." And he's like, "Wait a minute, what? Like, I don't know anything about names being on my computer." He started to freak out because he realized that he again was losing at his own game. Becoming very obvious at this point that he was just no longer really able to control himself the way that he thought that he could. He would act out his fantasies when he was younger on animals, and that was easy to do because he lived in the middle of nowhere and they would hunt and no one would question it. He didn't really have to hide too much. And then when he went out into the world after being, raised in the woods for his entire life, he realized that he had urges to kill people as well, but that was going to be a little bit more difficult. And then he started, killing people, and he had perfected that, and he knew just how to do it. He had read Mindhunter. He had read all these books, and he knew what he was doing, and he was getting away with it. So he thought he was doing a great job, but then his urges would come, more frequently, and he was losing control because of that. While he was using those different ATMs through, New Mexico and Texas and Arizona, he actually was on his way to his sister's wedding. So I think that whole trip wasn't even him running. It sounds like it was just him going on a planned trip. And these planned trips is when he would coordinate these different times he would kill. So no one would question him about why he was gone for so many days. He'd be like, "Oh, I have to go to my sister's wedding. I've got to drive. It'll be easier." But that would give him, multiple states that he could drive through, many different options, and lots of time of being by himself to commit these crimes and not be questioned by family about why were you gone for days? Why were you in this state? Why were you doing this? Why were you doing that? This wedding was literally in between his last two bank transactions after he killed Samantha, right before they caught him in Texas. So I believe he likely was planning on killing someone along that trip, and he just couldn't wait any longer. So he acted in Anchorage to kind of hold him over until he could reach one of his kill kits and do what he planned to do. He said he saw a couple that he was stalking at a park in Anchorage, and he was going to shoot both of them. So again, he's kind of straying from what he normally did. He preferred, to ambush these people, to have time with them and then strangle them for the most part. But he was so antsy to kill someone that he was just going to shoot these people in a park. And two officers ended up pulling up, totally unrelated, and it scared him away. And then shortly after that is when he ended up attacking and killing Samantha. But he said after Samantha, he just didn't feel that, he didn't feel the urge subside when it came to killing people. And so they believe that he likely killed someone on his way through Texas as well. But he just was unraveling. He was, falling apart, and these names were now showing up on his computer, and all these things were being found, and he was just in the midst of really realizing that he was never going to be fully in control ever again. At this point in time, he had hinted that there were 11 or 12 kill kits out there, and this really indicated that he had 11 or 12 victims. But this was backed even further when sometime, I believe in November of 2012, 11 skulls that were drawn in blood his own blood were found in his cell, all on their own piece of paper, and investigators believed that each one of those represented one of his victims. And they decided to kind of test this out similar to the way that they tested out the Deborah Feldman idea, because Israel wanted to make sure that his story and what he did was told the way he wanted it to be told. And he wanted to make sure that everything he did was recognized for what it actually was. And so he would correct investigators when they would say something wrong, because he did not want the wrong thing getting out there, because he worked too hard at what he did for the wrong thing to get out there. So they decided to just start stating 11 victims as if it was fact, because they knew based on the months and months of questioning him that he would correct them if they were wrong. And he never did. So they believed that he in fact had 11 victims. Now, there were some that began to speculate that he started killing earlier than 2001, but this is when the FBI has released that he started killing. First of all, like I said before, he said that after his daughter was born, he wasn't going to harm children. So some believe that means that he was harming children prior to this, meaning that he was harming children before the army, which would have been like 97, 98. And we do know that he attacked that young woman around the time, the one that he let go. And a lot of people started to think also because of this that he was involved in a local Colville murder that happened of a 12-year-old girl named Julie Marie Harris. Lived in Colville the same time that Israel did. He was 18 at the time that she disappeared and was murdered. It was March 3rd, 1996, and Julie was waiting for a ride to church when she disappeared. And her mom, I think, almost immediately realized something was wrong and that she was missing and searched all over. Some people were saying, you know, there was a serial killer in this area who was in the middle of realizing he wanted to kill people. And this young woman had 2 prosthetic feet, so it would have been an easy victim in his eyes. So her prosthetic feet ended up being found about a month after her disappearance at the mouth of the Colville River, and about 20 miles away, her remains were found a year later by another river. And a lot of people also think that because there's bodies of water involved, this is very possible. 48 Hours has done a documentary on Israel Keyes, and in this, they specifically speak about Julie and the possibility that she was one of his first victims, that he was killing before 2001. They apparently sent people to talk to her friends when they went to do interviews, and one of her friends at the time stated all these years later that they had never told anyone, but Julie actually met Israel at the local pool. And according to this friend, Julie gave Israel her address and her phone number, and this information had never come forward before. And honestly, I was pissed because 48 Hours told her mom this for the first time while videotaping her, which I think is very unsavory in my personal opinion. I think that's, if I was told something that way, I'd be very, very upset, especially information like that someone had allegedly been keeping secret for years and years and years. They also told the FBI the same information, and the FBI said that they had never heard of this before and that this person would need to come forward so they could investigate the lead further, but I have yet to see that this person ever did come forward. So at this point, I don't know if that's a proven fact to link Julie with Israel, proving that his murder started way before 2001, or if, you know, it's still just speculation, but I've seen nothing new in Julie's case linking her further to this. But there are a lot of people that believe it's just way too coincidental that she was taken around the same years Israel was in that area and basically becoming a serial killer. Authorities have also asked Israel if he killed anyone in Canada, and he apparently was traveling on the Alcan Highway in 2007, which is this long highway that goes all the way up through Canada into Alaska, and he was there, I believe, for a week. He was on that highway. But when they asked him this, you guys, he gave a response that makes my stomach turn and makes me very worried. When they said, "Have you killed any Canadians?" his exact response was, "Canadians don't count." Now, there are a lot of people out there that believe that Israel contributed to some of the deaths along the Highway of Tears. They started in the 70s, so obviously he did not start them. It would have been years and years after that he would have participated in any of those killings. But a lot of people believe because he was raised in the Ark Church, believing that any other race is subhuman, that maybe this is kind of him, you know, easily being able to kill these indigenous women and children. Some people have said, oh, there's no way he did this because he had a, you know, child with someone that was an indigenous woman, but I think that means absolutely not crap. I don't think that speaks anything of him, personally, but the thing that bothers me is that, you know, he was raised thinking that he was superior, and the way that he said it, that Canadians don't count, when, you know, most of the population over that way is Indigenous Canadians, is that maybe it's just raising the superior red flag to me, if you're picking up what I'm throwing down. So he's either basically saying that Canadians don't count as in he just kills them for fun and doesn't count them because he believes they're subhuman, or he is saying that for some strange reason he just decided Canadians don't count so he wouldn't kill them. And I don't know about you, but based on his history, one of those seem to fit in better than the other, and it's not the latter. It's definitely the one where he just kills them because he thinks they're lesser. So there's this huge question mark up in the air of, you know, how many Canadian deaths could he be responsible for if they didn't count? Unfortunately, Israel continued to slip away from helping authorities. They tried everything they absolutely could. They said that there were times where they were preparing presentations to give Israel. Like, they got to the point where they knew they just had to keep him going, and they wanted to please him any way they could to get more information. And they would remember walking to go have a meeting with him and think, you know, I can't believe I'm preparing a presentation for a serial killer. But they had no other choice. They felt like they had to do this. Finally, on November 30th, 2012, they finally got him to agree to help locate his kill kits. They came up with this idea that they wanted to give him back control, because that seemed to be where things switched, is when he lost control. So they were going to let him use Google Maps, obviously alongside FBI investigators, as well as a drone to fly remotely, and he could tell them a general location, and then he would be able to fly the drone himself and take them to these kids. They figured, one, he would enjoy feeling like he's out in the world and in these locations that clearly he had some sort of connection to, and two, he would feel so in control. And sure enough, he took the bait and he agreed to do this. But 2 days after this, on December 2nd, 2012, Israel Keyes was found dead in his cell. He had ended his life. He left behind a note. It's a very long note. There is a transcription of it linked down below at the Murder Squad website. And it is hands down one of the most unsettling things I have ever read. It essentially was just him kind of like talking about his hatred for America and how nobody's free and like all these things like that, and him reminiscing on murdering people. And it sounds like he was maybe speaking of like one person in particular, and like he was describing in detail, you know, wondering what they would look like covered in blood. And like, it was so upsetting and disturbing, and it was a poem, which made it 10 times worse than it already was. And unfortunately, it gave authorities no further answers. It was not written in a way that he intended to give them answers. It's like his beautiful farewell to killing people that he thought was just the greatest thing in the entire world. At this point, like I said, there's at least 7 more victims unknown that are out there, and I think honestly that the count is likely way higher than that. Personally, the way he spoke about the Canadians, that they don't count, I think, you know, being the closest he could get away from his home in Alaska and Washington across, like, you know, country borders, I think it's so possible that he used that as a hotspot. If you think about the indigenous population there as well, they're overlooked all the time when it comes to criminal investigations. So they can go missing or be killed and nothing really happens with their case. So he could have seen that as the best opportunity possible to kill as many people as possible and satisfy his urges without anything bad happening to him. But the FBI, as I stated in the beginning of this video, is begging for the public's help, and they have been for a few years now. There was an author named Maureen Callahan, and you can thank this woman for pretty much all of the information that I have just brought you, because before she fought the government, majority of this information was not released to the public. She wrote a book called American Predator, and it just released, I believe, in 2019, and she first reported on Israel Keyes, I believe, right after he was captured in 2012. And she couldn't get away from his story. And she kept trying to find more and realized authorities weren't releasing anything. And she spent, I think, about 5 or 6 years working on this book. But she spent $30,000 of her own money fighting the government, hiring crazy lawyers to help her get them released, these documents. Because for some bizarre reason, and like, I personally do not understand this, even after he died, authorities would not release anything. And that's frustrating to me because his case, he went God knows how many places, you guys. He was all over the country. He was in multiple different countries, and there's just no way that you can help locate victims after someone has ended their life and can no longer help you. There's no way to locate those victims without some sort of help, without people being aware of what is going on around them. You know, people in those towns and cities knowing what they should have, should be thinking about, and certain times that they may have seen something. And she fought so dang hard to get them to release the information. I still, to this day, do not understand why they felt the need to keep it private anyways. He was no longer alive. It's not like they were protecting the integrity of an investigation of someone that they could no longer try. But either way, they ended up eventually releasing everything. The FBI has an entire Facebook page dedicated to him, which I have linked down below. It is a very, very helpful resource. They have 5 separate videos up that are also on YouTube. There are 5 different interviews that were done with Israel Keyes, and they're all about an hour plus long. And they've got little voice recordings from very important snippets during those interviews. There's also an entire list of his whereabouts from 2001 to 2012. I'm talking dates that he left, airlines that he flew on, cars that he rented, their license plate numbers, the description of the vehicles, hotels that he stayed at, different places that he stopped at along the way. There's an interactive map as well. So if you see a particular location that you live and you see he's been there, you can just hover your mouse over it and it tells you where he's been, what car he was driving, what he was doing, where he stayed. So hopefully people locally can be like, all right, actually, you know what? I saw something in this time frame. I didn't know he was here, because he didn't make an impression. He drove through these places. He was in, he was out. So they're relying on the public remembering things to lead them to the right places. The FBI has also said that it's very possible that he killed someone near the Green River in Wyoming, where one of the kill kits was found. He didn't seem to travel too far away from his kill kits when it came to picking them up and then murdering someone. They believe there's a victim somewhere nearby. He also spent a lot of time in California's wine country in 2007, in May in particular, and he stayed in a place called Healdsburg, I think it is. I've heard it pronounced a few different ways, but he did something very odd there that makes authorities believe it's likely this is another location one of his victims was disposed of, at least. He rented a kayak at a local campground in Healdsburg, California. A couple of the ways that he told authorities that he would dispose of bodies was by boat or by kayak. So him renting a kayak is a huge indicator that someone was disposed of in that area. That doesn't necessarily mean they went missing from that area, because we know he can cross state lines, which just makes this 10 times more frustrating. But there are people that could have maybe seen him or seen something strange, or seen him in another nearby location at that time that could give authorities answers. There's not a type of victim that they can easily look for in a database. There's not any real specific pattern. They're basically just looking at vague locations, times that he went to those locations, and are just hoping they'll find something along the way. But he would travel so far by car and would veer off. There's absolutely no telling. They also want people to watch out for these kill kits, because they are stashed. There's at least 10, if not 11 of them still out there somewhere. He also apparently would put money after robbing banks and money caches. So there's also money ones that are thought to be out there. And they believe that if they are able to find these, people that are, out exploring, hiking, doing all sorts of different things. They could stumble across one of these, and that could pinpoint a location that someone may have been killed in, and they could use other bits of the puzzle that they have to piece it together. And honestly, that scares me, because if no one knows about what he did and his kill kits and these different bits of information, on all of it is so important. It would be so easy for someone to stumble across something like that and be like, oh look, a whole thing of like free ammo and guns. Like maybe someone stashed this here because they were hunting. Not everyone's gonna look at that and be like, oh wow, this is from a serial killer, I know about this. So that's why I thought it was so important to get this story out there, and for you guys to continue getting the story out there, because it's things like the kill kits that will lead to the victims. I just want everyone to know what this man has done, simply because that is the best chance that these unnamed victims have at being found and their families getting any sort of closure, because at this point it's like a needle in a haystack. Make sure you guys take the time to share this video or the FBI page for Israel Keyes everywhere that you absolutely can, because from what I've seen, not a lot of movement has happened since the FBI posted that page. I honestly think it's because not that many people know that it exists. I think if this information was spread like wildfire across the country, that different things would happen, that more tips would come in. Thank you guys so much for listening to the 4 victims that I spoke about today, and hopefully all the other victims' names are filled in eventually so that they can have some sort of peace and their family can have closure. And while there will not necessarily be any justice, at least no one will be sitting there with 1 million questions in their head, not having a place to go and grieve their loved ones. It's heartbreaking, and the things this man did were insane, and him ending his life was his final last-ditch effort at having full control. But on that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to become a part of the Hallen fam so we can hopefully bring them home together, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.